Hello. Welcome everybody to what has been my most anticipated piece of the programming. I was absolutely delighted when I was asked, would I be available to speak to and interview Mr. Darren Shan, Master of the Macabre? And I'm absolutely delighted that he's joining us today. Hello.
Hi Janet, thanks for having me.
Delighted. So one of the first things that you're going to do today is, I believe you ran a poll on your website and on social media that you're going to read for us first.
That's right. I gave, through my Facebook and Twitter page and blog page, a few different choices. Zombie, Lord Loss, Archibald Locke's, my new series. So I gave my fans a chance to choose which extract I would read from. I had a sneaky feeling they'd go for this one, Cirque du Freak.
The beloved classic.
That launched me back in January 2000. It's still the entry book for pretty much 99.9% of my fans. Most widely, Cirque du Freak. And for those who might not have read the book, Cirque du Freak is a story about two boys called Darren and Steve, who get tickets to a performance of the Cirque du Freak when it comes to their hometown. Cirque du Freak is this weird magical circus. It plays a lot like a normal circus, and instead of clowns and acrobats and the normal sort of performers you would find, everyone at Cirque du Freak has some sort of freakish magical ability. So there's a woman called Truska who can grow a beard on stage and then suck the hairs back into her face. There's a guy called Hands who can run 100 meters on his hands in about 8 or 9 seconds, and so on and so forth. It's a show for adults, but Darren and Steve manage to get hold of a pair of tickets. They sneak out of their homes late at night. They cross town on bikes, going to this old abandoned movie theatre where the show has been staged. Now they get seats up near the front, and when the lights go down, they're staring up at a big empty stage, waiting to see what's going to happen next. When everyone was quiet, the owner of the Cirque du Freak, Mr. Tall, walked on and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and even though his voice was low and croaky, everybody could hear what he was saying. "Welcome to the Cirque du Freak, home of the world's most remarkable human beings. We are an ancient circus. We have toured for 500 years, bringing the grotesque to generation after generation. Our lineup has changed many times, but never our aim, which is to astound and terrify you. We present acts both frightening and bizarre, acts you can find nowhere else in the world. Those who are easily scared should leave now," he warned. "I'm sure there are people who came tonight thinking our freaks would be people in masks or harmless misfits. This is not so. Every act you see tonight is real. Each performer is unique, and none are harmless." That was the end of his speech, and he walked off stage. Two pretty women in shiny suits came on next and unlocked the door of the Wolfman's cage. A few people looked scared, but nobody left. The Wolfman was yapping and howling when he first came out of the cage, until one of the ladies hypnotized him with her fingers. The other lady spoke to the crowd. "You must be very quiet," she said. "The Wolfman will not be able to hurt you as long as we control him, but a loud sound could wake him up, and then he would be deadly." When they were ready, they stepped down from the stage and walked the hypnotized Wolfman through the theatre. His hair was a dirty grey colour, and he walked with a stoop, fingers hanging down around his knees. The ladies let you stroke him if you wanted, but you had to do it gently. Steve rubbed him as he went by, but I was afraid he might wake up and bite me, so I didn't. "What did it feel like?" I asked, as quietly as I could. "It was spiky," Steve replied, "like a hedgehog." He lifted his fingers to his nose and sniffed. "It smelled strange, like burning rubber." The Wolfman and ladies were about halfway down the rows of seats when there was a big bang. I don't know what made the noise, but suddenly the Wolfman began roaring, and he shoved the ladies away from him. People screamed, and those nearest him leapt from their seats and ran. One woman wasn't quick enough, and the Wolfman leapt on her and dragged her to the ground. She was screaming fit to burst, but nobody tried to help. He rolled her over onto her back and bared his teeth. She stuck her hand up to push him away, but he got his teeth in it and bit it off. A couple of people fainted when they saw that, and loads more began yelling and running. Then, out of nowhere, Mr. Tall appeared behind the wolfman and wrapped his arms around him. The wolfman struggled for a few seconds, but Mr. Tall whispered in his ear, and he relaxed. While Mr. Tall led him back to the stage, the women in their suits calmed down the crowd and told them to return to their seats. The woman with the bitten off hand went on screaming. Blood was pumping out of the end of her wrist, covering the ground and other people. Steve and me were staring at her. Our mouths wide open, wondering if she was going to die. Mr. Tall returned from stage, picked up the severed hand, and gave a loud whistle. Two people in blue robes with hoods over their heads ran forward. They were short, not much bigger than me or Steve, but with thick arms and legs and lots of muscles. Mr. Tall sat the woman up and whispered something in her ear. She stopped screaming and sat still. Mr. Tall took hold of her wrist, then reached into his pocket and took out a small brown leather pouch. He opened it with his free hand and sprinkled a sparkly pink powder onto the bleeding wrist. Then he stuck the hand against it and nodded to the two people in the blue suits. They produced a pair of needles and loads of orange string, and then, to the amazement of everybody, they stitched the hand back onto the wrist. They stitched for 5 or 6 minutes, their needles going in and out of the woman's flesh all the way around the wrist. When finished, they put their needles and a new spread away and returned to wherever they'd come from. When they'd gone, Mr. Tall let go of the woman's hand and stepped back. "Move your fingers," he said, and she gave him a wiggle. They moved, and everybody gasped. She gave him another wiggle, then stood and lifted the hand above her head. She shook it as hard as she could, and it was good as new. "You will be okay," Mr. Tall told her. "The stitches will fall out after a couple of days. It will be fine after that." "Maybe that's not good enough," someone shouted, and a big red-faced man stepped forward. "I'm her husband, and I say we should go to a doctor and then the police. You can't let a wild animal like that out into the crowd. What if he'd bitten off her head?" "Then she would be dead," Mr. Tall said calmly. "Listen, Buster," the husband began, but Mr. Tall interrupted. "Tell me, sir, where were you when the wolfman was attacking?" "Me?" the man asked. "You are her husband. You were sitting beside her when the beast escaped. Why did you not leap to her rescue?" "Well, there was no time. I couldn't. I wasn't." No matter what he said, the husband couldn't win, because there was only one true answer. He had been running away, looking after himself. "Listen to me," Mr. Tall said. "I gave fair warning. I said this show could be dangerous. This is not a nice, safe circus where nothing goes wrong. Mistakes can and do happen, and sometimes people end up a lot worse off than your wife. That's why this show is banned. That's why we must play in old theatres in the middle of the night. Most of the time, things do go smoothly, and nobody gets hurt, but we cannot guarantee your safety." Mr. Tall turned in a circle and seemed to look everybody in the eye while turning. "We cannot guarantee anybody's safety," he roared. "Another accident like this is unlikely, but it could happen. Once again, I say, if you are afraid, leave now, before it is too late." A few people did leave, but most stayed to see the rest of the show, even the woman who nearly lost a hand. "Do you want to go?" I asked Steve, half hoping he'd say yes. I was excited, but scared as well. "Are you crazy?" Steve said. "This is great. You don't want to go, do you?" "Oh, no way," I lied, and slapped on a shaky little smile. If only I hadn't been so scared like a coward. I could have left and everything would have been fine. But no, I had to act like a big man and sit it out to the end. If you only knew how many times I've wished since then that I'd fled with all the speed in my body and never looked back. That's the end of that.
That was wonderful. You do an amazing Mr. Long.
Thanks. I actually, normally, I've done that scene hundreds, if not thousands of times at events over the years. Normally, at a live event, I'll get people up from the crowd to act it out with me. I've got a little condensed down version, and there's a few roles, and someone plays Mr. Tall, someone plays the Wolfman. But obviously, when it's just me here today, I felt it was easier to read it out in the book. I probably haven't read it out live from the book in close to 20 years.
Wow.
When I first did my event in Dublin back in the early 2000s, it was in an all-girls school. I'll never forget. I think I read from the book then, but after that, I realised, condensing it down and turned it into more of a little skit. Yes, it's been nice. That's the first time I've said in a long, long time I've actually gone back and read the full chapter.
Well, we're absolutely honoured. Thank you.
It was fun for me as well.
So just to let people know, this is our interview with Mr. Darren Shan, and this is an all ages, for children of all ages interview. So there will be aspects about horror in general, which we won't get into because, like I said, this is for children of all ages. So your books are...
Brave children.
Brave children of all ages. Well, I think we all like to be a little scared, and I very much believe that it's important that children know that there are monsters, and they know that their choices have consequences, and that they can be brave. And sometimes the bravest thing is going back to somewhere where something has happened that was negative to them, and that when they make a choice, that's at the end of it, they can go back and make a different choice, maybe the next time. And I think that's why your books are so very important. So thank you so much for writing them. I do believe I saw you talking about how your books topped the polls in primary schools across the country, but you had a very hard time convincing publishers that children wanted to read these books.
Yeah, I wrote the first draft of Cert Freak back in 1997, the middle of 1997. And I also write books for adults. And actually at that stage I had sold, I think, my first adult book. So I sent Cert Freak, when I finished the first draft, I sent it to my agent. And I said, look, I've no idea if you've got any interest in children's authors, but I've written this book. Can you have a look and let me know what you think? And he said, oh, I'll have a look at it. And he went and read it and he got very excited. He said, yeah, this is really, really cool. I think it's going to be a big success. And he sent it out to 20 different publishers to try and get a bit more started. And all 20 turned it down. Nobody wanted to touch it. Many said it was too dark for a children's book. They thought it would be banned in schools, that bookstores would refuse to stock it. And in fairness to them, when it first came out, W.H. Smith in the UK refused to stock it at first.
Wow.
And the next year, it was up for their Children's Book of the Year award. So when they realised there would be no backlash, they got on board. But nothing like Cert Freak. We had House, which was around for a while before then, but that was a much safer form of horror. Cert Freak really went into the darkness. A child gets buried alive. It looks at the consequences of what happens when you make these life-altering choices. Yeah, it was extremely dark, and publishers were terrified of it. They really thought there was going to be this big negative reaction, that librarians and teachers would be up in arms against it, and they didn't want any part of it. We were lucky. My agent arranged a few meetings with publishers to try and talk it through with them and get some more feedback. And ahead of one of those meetings, a publisher at HarperCollins, her name was Domenica De Rosa, she read the book again, a second time ahead of the meeting, just to refresh herself with it. And it was only when she read it a second time, and I think she came to it not so shocked. I think the first time it shocked everyone. When she read it a second time, knowing what was going to happen, she went, actually, no, this has got potential. She made a few suggestions, I did a rewrite, and then she went and bought it. She actually went off on maternity leave to have twins, and she never returned. And her replacement tried to sell the rights back to us.
Oh, wow.
Like anyone else. But because we had no plan B, my agent said, no, you bought it now, you're stuck with it. And they spent over 2 years, they sat in the book for over 2 years waiting to see what was going to happen. And you often hear writers talking about lucky breaks, green, and it seems crazy to think someone like Stephen King might ever have needed a lucky break. But luck does play a big part in it. And my agent, as I said, he was my agent for my adult books. When I said to him, I've written a children's book, do you have any other children's authors? He said, not really, it's not something I do, but I do have one other children's author who happened to be called Joanne Rowling, who just released her first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And in the 2.5 years after that, obviously Harry Potter was a worldwide phenomenon. And suddenly my publishers was paying a lot more attention to what my agent was saying. And it went from being this book they didn't want to touch to being given quite a big push. And it's grown since then. But it very, very nearly never got out the front gates.
Given the amazing number of children's books you've written and how they're so well known and beloved, there's probably a couple of people regretting the decision at the time. But that's
it's
consequences.
the way it works. Publishers will always say they want something new. and they want something different, and they want new, fresh voices. It's not true. They want the next Harry Potter, the next Darren Shan, the next Anthony Horowitz, because they know how to market that. If you come along with something that's different to everything else there's been, it terrifies them. You'll find one or two, you'll always find one, hopefully, who'll take a chance. But the vast majority, it's hard, and I understand it. I'm not harsh on them, because I can see it from their point of view. And the bookstores, they want to know what genre a book fits, where it goes on the shelf, who's going to buy it. It's very, very much market driven, which is a shame, because, as I say, certain freak books like Certain Freak do sometimes fall between the cracks.
I find it very interesting, because I do know, growing up myself and being an avid reader, if somebody had said, oh no, this book isn't for you, no, this is too serious a book, or too grown up a book, or too scary for you to read, I would have been, how do I get it? So for, now as an adult, I'm like, the fact that so many places didn't want to publish this, the fact that, a large retailer in the UK went, no, we're banning that book, that's a lot of publicity.
It is, although at the same time, in the children's world, that can be very negative. Because for the most part, children don't buy books.
Yes.
10, 11 years of age, it's the parents and grandparents who buy books. And, whereas negative publicity for kids can be really exciting, if the mum and dad say, oh no, we're not, we read something like this on the front page of the Sun, it's Darren Shan's a devil worshipper, we're not buying the book, then, that can be the end of your career right there. There was never apart from the W.H. Smith thing, which only lasted a month or two, then they started stopping it, and they've been great supporters ever since. But apart from that, it never materialised, backlash. And released all around the world, in the States. We thought in America, with the southern states, there'd be big backlash to it. And I've been on tour across the States several times. I've been through Texas. I get great feedback there. It never materialised. And I was a bit disappointed, because I'd spent a lot of time arranging my arguments and counter-arguments. I was all geared up for the fight, and we never had it. It just sort of sold and sold and sold, and everyone loved it.
Well, I'm now at the stage where I have nieces, and I found that if their parents won't buy them a book, they'll, ask Auntie Janet or the last granny. They'll mention, oh, there's this book I like. But I have learned, much to the wrath of my sister and brother-in-law, to check with them. But they also know that if their children are asking for books from relations, sometimes they reconsider, which is really good. Wow. So we've had questions come in already, because you're so popular. I've had people wondering, will the Macabre series be available on audiobook? Because your wonderful Cirque du Freak is available on audiobook, and anyone who has a membership for Audible, they're available to listen to. Will more of your wonderful works be made into audiobooks?
Unlikely in the near future. The Demonata, the first 6 were released in audio CD a long time back, long before Audible or anything. In the UK, it was they did a great job in it. My publisher HarperCollins did them, and then there was some problem. They stopped after book 6, and then they didn't do any more. I've chased them up over the years, and I've gone to my American publishers, and I've tried to get an audio version available, especially now since Audible has come along and it's such a huge thing. But they've not shown any interest in it. I don't know why. There's a chance at some point I might try and go and record them myself. I bought a microphone and some bits and pieces earlier last year with the plan of recording one of my short books, seeing how that went, and then maybe going on to do the other stuff. I haven't had a chance yet to get around to actually doing that, so we'll see. But in terms of Certain Freak, I've probably done. There's someone who comes in, she does a great voice of them, or he does. But with the other works, unless I do it myself, it's not looking likely in the near future.
Based on your wonderful reading, we've had somebody ask the question: do you read out loud while you're writing, or working on extra bits? Given that the voice and presence of Mr. Long is such a thing, do you find that when you're writing things to get in character, or to find if something is what a character would say, do you voice them out loud?
No, I'm always surprised when I get complimented on my reading style. I hate my voice. When I hear myself from a recording, it's not how I sound in my head when I'm talking to myself inside my head. I sometimes meet fans at events, and they look very disappointed when they see me, because I don't look like they expect me to look either. They all want Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore, big hair and piercings, and I fed up this little cherubic happy-go-lucky guy, and they want the Master of Darkness. They say, "You're too happy. Why are you smiling?" But no, I never really. No. When I write, I always write in silence. No, that's not actually true. I always have music playing. I have a jukebox in my background, and I'll always have CDs on the go. I don't like writing in complete silence. I find that impressive. But no, I don't really voice voices out loud. No. And what you'll find if I was to do more scenes, my Mr. Crepsley and Lord Loss would sound exactly the same as Mr. Tall. I've only got one voice. My dark, deep voice. That's basically it.
So I'm going to ask a little more traditional personal question. So one of the questions is, who are your people and where are you from?
Well, as you can tell from the accent, I'm a good Irish boy. I am. I was born in London. My parents are from Palace Kenry in Limerick. And you know, my families go back. My grandparents lived here, my great grandparents, and further back. In the 1960s, my mother's family moved over to London to get work. And so obviously, my mother was a young woman at the time, so she went with them. My father followed them over. So I was born in London in the 70s. But we moved back here to Limerick at the end of the 1970s. And I've lived here ever since. I've been here now for 42, 43 years. I never got the accent. The Cockney twang stuck with me for some reason. But yeah, I've been here, as I say, all my life. I've lived in Limerick. I still live a 3-minute drive away from my parents' house where I grew up. It's just home. I've been very, very lucky. I've traveled all around the world, all across the States, the Far East, Australia, all around the place. I've been very, very fortunate. I've really done a lot of globe trotting. But yeah, this is home to me. This is where I always come back to. And yeah, that's where the name Darren Shan came from. My real name is Darren O'Shaughnessy. And in Limerick, that's often pronounced O'Shaughnessy. My grandfather, my father's side, was always known as Paddy Shan. Even his children called him that, Paddy Shan. And so when I came to write Cert the Freak, I'd already sold my first book for adults under my real name. And so I decided I was going to use a pseudonym. And I thought, what could I use? And the first name that popped in my head was Darren Shan, as a tribute to my dead granddad. And then I knew I was going to start it as a true story, say it was a true story. So I thought, well, it's not a real name, so I might as well use it for the character as well. And thus Darren Shan was born.
Brilliant. So now that you have junior members of the Shan clan, as you call them, your own children, has your writing style changed?
Yeah, so it's sort of nosedived. I've had 5 or 6 very, very lazy years. I write very quickly when I am writing. But yeah, since Dante was my first son, he's 7 now, and I've got a 2.5-year-old daughter. Yeah, I had 15, 16 years where I was out touring the whole time and going across the world. And, you know, I'd go on a 3-week tour of the States and a 3 or 4-week tour around the UK and Ireland. You know, I'd be back home for a few weeks, I'd get some writing done. I'd be off to Japan or Taiwan in the Far East. And so yeah, I'd had a lot of that by the time my son was born. And it was was a good time to step back and take a bit of time off. So I took things easy. It was about 4 years where I didn't publish any Darren Shan books at all. I did release some books for adults under my other pseudonym, Darren Dash. They were books I've written first drafts of quite a while back and rewrote and edited into shape. So yeah, I've had a few lazy years, which it won't seem that way. I've released 6 books over last year and this year. But
you're parenting 2 brand new humans into the world. That's not lazy. That's busy.
I think so. I made that choice. I made the choice of, you know, spending more time with the family or going out and continue doing, you know, working to my limits. But yeah, I should be doing more than I am. I should be writing a bit more, because even with the kids, yeah, I do have more time. But I've got into the habit of, you know, spending a long time checking my emails and surfing the web and writing very long daily blog posts. Yeah, basically hiding from the work. But I'm coming to the end now of that sort of lazy period. My daughter's now 2.5, so I'm having to spend less time with him now. My son's at school; she'll be starting preschool in the autumn. So yeah, I think I'll get back into the saddle properly from sort of autumn onwards. And
when you were young yourself, did you write stories, and were they horror stories?
Yes and yes. I can remember writing even when I was 5 or 6 years of age. I can remember when I write short stories when I lived in London. So that's how I can place it to an actual age. I can remember one day I used to go to school called English Martyrs in London, and my mother was a teacher there. And I remember writing a short story, and my teacher said, "Oh, that's very good. You can go and read it in another class now." And this will sound like I've made it up, but it is true. I didn't go to my other's class because there was a girl I was sweet on in another class. I went to her class instead and read it out there to impress her. So I was a little Lothario even when I was 6. And yeah, I've always loved telling stories. I've always loved using my imagination, making things up. I was an avid reader from a very young age. And I used to like horror stories. If I'd write all sorts of stuff back then, when you were writing stories for school, you had to be careful in what you put into them. So a lot of it was funny stories, fantastical things. But yeah, it was one thing I wanted more than anything else. As a child, there were lots of other things I did want to be: an astronaut, a vet, a football player, a rock star, so on and so on. But being a writer was the thing I really, really wanted. That was one thing I craved more than anything else. And as I got older and hit my teens, that determination to be a writer solidified. And I realised, this is my path. Regardless of how it went financially, I often get asked, what would I be doing if I wasn't a writer? I'd be working in some office somewhere, but I would still be writing in my spare time. For me, it's a hobby first and foremost. It's just something I have to do. And the fact I'm going to make a career at it, that's just a very big bonus.
What advice would you give to a young person or a very young person who's interested in writing and maybe has written some stories in school that they want and wants to get into the practice of writing?
Just keep on doing it. There's no magic involved in being a writer. The more you write, the more you learn, the better you get. It's as simple as that. If you're prepared to put in the hard work, you will see yourself develop, you'll see yourself get better, you'll find yourself able to do much more. I had ideas for great books when I was 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age, but I lacked the tools to tell those stories. As I got older, as I kept on writing short stories and writing more and trying more and failing and learning from those mistakes, I gradually found myself just gradually improving. It's a gradual process. You don't suddenly flick a switch and you become a published author. There's a lot of work. You have to write a lot of bad stories. You learn from those mistakes. Never get disheartened. You'll always learn. There's no story that's a waste of time. If it doesn't work out, you will learn from it. I always say try and finish what you start. So if you set out to write a story, finish it. Even if it doesn't work very well, it's good to finish it, because then you learn more about how you tie beginnings with middles with endings. If you quit after a couple of pages, then that's all you're going to learn from. So don't be afraid of failure. Don't be too put out when a story turns out not to be as good as your favorite books, but just keep going. And it will take a lot of time, no matter what way you go about it. I was 26 or 27 when my first book was published, and that's very, very young for a published author. Even 20 years later, more than 20 years later, I'm still, in writer terms, I'm sort of not that old. But so don't worry if you haven't written a bestseller by the time you're 15 or 16. Don't lose heart. Keep going. Make time to enjoy life as well. Have fun in your life. Go out. You don't have to write the whole time. Everything you learn, everything you experience in life, you can bring to your writing. So make sure you make time for a bit of fun as well. And just go with it and enjoy it. Write stories you like to read. That's my last bit of advice. Write stories you would like to read. You're going to spend a lot of time as a writer locked away from the world. This is my office. I spend, when I'm writing 5, 6, 7 hours a day in here, all by myself, no contact with the world, writing these stories. So if you're going to go into that much isolation, make sure the stories you write are stories that excite you. Don't write for the market, because you'll find it quite a lonely, soul-destroying journey, I think, if you do that.
This is October, which is spooky month for a lot of people, and they watch spooky films, and not necessarily horror films, because the spooky things is a very long range. And the spooky films that I enjoyed as a kid were different from the horror films that I would watch as an adult. Was there a spooky type or horror film that you used to enjoy at a young age and that you might still watch today?
Well, I loved horror from very, very young. So even going back what I said about being at school in London, I can remember seeing my first Dracula film when I was living in London. So that was at 5 or 6 years of age. And I loved it. Dracula, I'll never forget the scene. He was crawling across the wall of a castle. And I just thought that was whoa, brilliant. The film that really, really thrilled me and terrified me and properly turned me into a horror aficionado was Salem's Lot, the 1970s TV adaptation of the Stephen King novel. It was in 2 parts. And I was living in Ireland at that stage. I was maybe 8, 9 years of age, I think. And I saw the second half. I missed the first half. My next door neighbor told me about it, and I watched the second half of TV. And it was the most terrifying thing I ever saw. And I just loved it. I always found horror exciting. I often compare it to a roller coaster ride. It is very, very scary, but you also know it's safe. It's not real. It's something that's made up. You watch it for fun. You watch it for the thrill of being excited and on the edge of your seat. But then you get off and you're back in your safe world. And I never had that problem switching off, even as a child. I always knew, I like to pretend that vampires were real because that made it more exciting. But, I knew they weren't because, my friends weren't being abducted by vampires every second of life. So, Salem's Lot for me was the one that really I remember most fondly.
You're not afraid in your books to have characters die. How do you pick what character is going to die? Or do you know from the beginning? Or is it just in your head that something will happen and one of these characters will die? Which is it? And how do you decide?
But the story decides. I always go, every book I've ever written can be traced back to the prologue of Cirque du Freak. In the prologue of Cirque du Freak, I say, this is a true story. And in real life, bad things happen. Good guys sometimes lose, bad guys sometimes win, people sometimes die. And I've always written my books, even though they're fantastical books, I've always written them as if the rules of the real world apply to them. As much as possible, I try not to overshield my characters. And if you create these storylines where the characters go up against the odds and they're facing monsters and vampires and demons and so on, it's only logical that a good few of the characters are going to die. Sometimes I'll know a character's going to die at the start of the story. I'll know, I'll have a sense that the story's going to demand this character falls at some point. Other times I won't know, and I'll get to a certain point in the story and I'll realise, oh, actually, it's curtains for him or her. I have in my Archibald Locke's books. There's going to be 3 big volumes of that. Second volume books will just release this summer. And I thought it was going to be my only series where none of the main characters were going to die. I was delighted myself. I finally written a series, everyone comes out at the end of it alive. And then I came to write the first draft of volume 3 and realised, no, ain't going to quite be that smooth. Even though it's not a horror series, it's still, the story demanded, well, I'm not going to say how many deaths, but there's going to be one or more in the final set of books. I know it hurts the fans, but that's all part of the journey in the books. I think, I know that I loved fantasy as a teenager, and I stopped reading fantasy largely because characters weren't being killed off. This was before George R. R. Martin came along with his series of books. But I love David Eddings, but he wouldn't kill off any of these characters, and I just felt it was cheating. I felt, you've got to. It's always horrible when you invest in a character strongly and they get taken away from you. But that's life, and part of the journey of a good book is reflecting what we get in real life. And it's important, I think, that we have death along the way and learning how to deal with it.
That's one thing I find very interesting, because all of the main characters are of a certain age. They're all old enough to go and get on their bikes and go somewhere or choose to do things. But you don't shy away that some of these young adults have difficult lives, particularly in the Locke's books. There's no doubt that their parents love them, but their parents are flawed people, and sometimes the bad guys win or circumstances are difficult. And I really like that, because not every child lives in a world where everything is lovely and idyllic. Children have to deal with struggles and difficult things. And I think it's really wonderful that you bring these into your books. And some people say that, like horror, some topics are too difficult to write in the children's books. And one of the topics you're very upfront about in the zombie books, when your B's home life is very different, and that you look at the topic of racism in a very upfront way, because this is a difficult thing that children deal with.
Zombie. It was a strange one, zombie, because on the one hand, it is this big zombie apocalypse tale where the world is overrun by zombies, society crashes, and he's looking at some survivors trying to piece their lives back together again. But it's also a book all about racism and the rise of the far right. It actually predates the rise of the UKIP and Donald Trump and all that. I started it after not long after the bombings in London, the 7/7 bombings.
Yes.
So I could see the BNP won a few seats at local elections. You could sense people were afraid, and there were right-wingers preying on those fears. What I wanted to do with Zombie was look at what it would be like if you grew up in a household where the person you love most in the world, the person who is your protector, your father, is also a very, very strident racist, and how that would colour your view of the world, and how would you deal with that? How do you stand up to your father? it was an interesting question for me, because that's one of these things, where do all these racists come from? And, what happens, you've got two happy, loving racists bring up a child, they're going to bring up that child to be racist. And if you're being brought up to believe that racism is normal and that people of different colour are inferior to you and that they're taking over your country, that's what you're going to believe. And in the book, the character does eventually take a stand against the father. And she does realise, actually, no, this is wrong. And in my silence, I'm complicit. But I wanted to put people in a very uncomfortable position of being in her shoes and having to see the world through her eyes while she's living in that household and basically going along with what her father says in order to keep him on side and have a quiet life. It was an uncomfortable. The first book of Zombie was a very uncomfortable read for a lot of people. Quite a few readers, I think, didn't go beyond the first book. It's a pity because that's where all the sort of crazy, funnier stuff came in. But I wanted it to be a series that really reflected where we were in the early 21st century. When I was growing up, I just thought racism was going to be a thing of the past. But in my lifetime, and it's really, really sad to see it all come back and to see it be an issue still today.
I think it's
Zombie was my sort of cry for common sense.
Well, we have a wonderful program in all of our primary schools now and secondary schools called Give Racism the Red Card. And the Ireland that I grew up in and you grew up in has lots more different people with different skin tones and different cultures. I think that's a very wonderful thing. I think it makes us richer as a country and we get to tell different types of stories. So I would encourage people to read more of the zombie books. Particularly, I do believe we may be seeing it coming to our screens.
Hopefully. It was optioned a few years ago and a script has been written, a pilot script. It was written just before lockdown last year, the first lockdown. So I've heard nothing since that point. So I suspect, trying to get a brand new series to the ground, they probably thought it was better to sit in it for a while longer, put it to the sidelines before they started pitching and trying to raise funds. Because last year was not a good time to get a new horse out of the gates. So hopefully we'll come back to that. Certain Freak, there have been rumblings in that front as well, of rebooting that for a TV series.
Oh.
That's in the States. Both of them, both I think have been hit by lockdown. So we'll see. Maybe next year we might get advances on those fronts. But but if there is going to be adaptation anytime in the near future, it looks like a race between Zombie and Certain Freak.
So you've also, the Lord Lost books deals with werewolves, and we've a question coming going, will we see a mummy series from you, having done vampires and werewolves and magic portals?
I sometimes get asked that because I wrote about the vampires, my first series, then demons, then zombies. It did look like I was working my way through the old Universal stock of horror characters. But I always just go with what suits a story. I don't have it in my head, right, I've done demons, I've done vampires, what monsters am I going to do next? In the Archibald Locks books, there's no horror monsters. No, I don't know. I was never hugely a big fan of mummies. So I think they're quite limited in what you can do with them. So I can't see myself going there. Now, having said that, I could end this event today with an idea for a mummy story, could just strike me, and I'll run with it if it does. But no, I'm not. I don't imagine you're going down the mummy path. But I could be wrong.
We have another question is, would you ever collaborate with another author on a series of books? And if so, who would your top picks be?
I don't think so. I find writing, it's something that I like doing myself. And I know how my mind works, and I know how I structure things. Also, I work in a sort of strange way. I'll write a first draft of the book very, very quickly. And if it's part of a series, I'll then put it aside for several months. And I'll go and do another book or two. Then I'll return to it and do a rewrite. Then I'll leave it and I'll do a rewrite of book 2. Then I'll write the first draft of book 3. And I'll come back to book 1. It's a very unusual way of working. It works for me, and it allows me to tie everything together very neatly. But I think it would drive other authors up the walls. So I don't think so. Now, having said that, I am trying to get a picture book off the ground.
Ooh.
In which case, and I will be working with an illustrator, obviously, that goes ahead. But that's a different sort of collaboration. But in terms of doing a YA book with another author or an adult book with another author, I don't think so. Never say never, but I can't see any situation where I would be drawn into doing that.
We have a quote in from Fuzzy Years, which is their favorite quote of yours is, "Even in death may you be triumphant." And do you have any favorite quotes from your own characters?
I mean, that is the big one. I've never sort of approached my book with catchphrases in mind. I'm not like Only Fools and Horses trying to come up with a catchphrase for everyone. That's not part of my thing. And it was, the furthest thought of my mind when I wrote that line in I think it was Vampire Mountain. It was the first time we heard it, or Trials of Death. But yeah, that's become the sort of, it's almost taken a life of its own outside of the books. Loads and loads of fans have had it tattooed on themselves as a quote. Because I think you don't need to read the books for it to make sense. Even in death, may be triumphant. It's just a really strong quote all by itself. And yeah, that's the sort of all the quotes I've come up with over years, that is the one that it's my favorite as well, because it wasn't intended. It wasn't something I thought about, but it just became this runaway quote.
So I have a very different question from a very different point of view. I believe you are a supporter of a very specific soccer team.
That's right, the Super Spurs, Tottenham Hotspur. They get mentioned occasionally in my books. I think in certain freak, I think Darren might have had a Tottenham flag or poster on the wall or something like that. So occasionally I will mention them.
My condolences on the match with Chelsea. I'm not a huge soccer fan, but someone in my life is also a Spurs fan.
Listen, if you're a Spurs fan and you're a horror fan, those two worlds join very, very neatly. So
the emotional roller coaster.
Stairs at the White Hart Lane.
The emotional roller coaster of both, I guess. Are you looking forward to what's going to come for the rest of the season, or do you think they need a new change in management? They've only recently had one.
Listen, the reason I prefer horror books to football is horror books occasionally have a happy ending. At Spurs, I've yet to have one, so I have no hope that it's going to be anything but the dark and gloomy road ahead.
So maybe being a Spurs supporter has fed into your horror writing.
Well, I don't know about that, but nothing seems quite as horrific as a live game up at Spurs at the moment.
Thank you so much for joining us. The time has flown in and we're nearly finished. And we are so very grateful you joined us, because I know this is the only event that you're doing this year. So would you just like to recap your new books that are coming out and just remind people?
Sure. So after I think about 4 years of radio silence, I've surprise released 3 new Darren Shan books last year on April the 1st. I posted about it. Everyone thought it was an April Fool's joke. I said, I just released 3 new books today. And they went, ha, 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 ha. And then the next day they realised, actually, he did. I released them just as ebooks. It's called Archibald Locks. It's a big fantasy series. It's got a little bit of a dark edge to it, but it's not horror as...
I don't know.
Or
I'm not sure of that. Seeing 2 people that no one else can see and they're talking about gutting you in the very beginning, that's pretty much, that's horror.
it's a little bit, but it's not really. It's not, it's not like the Demonata where you've got people being ripped apart in front of your eyes, and if there is death, it's very discreetly handled, and it was just the tone the story wanted. It's not that I've moved away from horror. That's for this story. It just didn't need all the gore. So I released the first 3 books, which made up one big volume last year. This summer, I released 3 more. Again, it's the second big story arc. And next year, there'll be 3 more coming out, the final 3, and that'll be volume 3. And that'll be my Archibald Locks story. It's all about a boy who finds he has the power to unlock doors to a parallel universe to ours called The Merge. And over the course of 9 books, we explore this other universe, and also how he's got this power, where it's come from, why he's able to do these things. And it's questions that are gradually answered over the course of the series. It's been going really well. It's self-published, so it's not as you won't find it on the bookshelves. It doesn't have the big drive behind the publishers. We all turned down Cert the Freak, and unfortunately with Archibald Locks, they all turned it down again. And this time there was no knight to ride to my rescue. Domenica De Rosa has retired to bring up her kids.
Well, I've read the first 3 and I absolutely recommend them.
Yeah. Thanks. They've had a really good reaction from fans. So I would say read them as sort of big chunks. I had to release them as small books because they were self-published. I had to do them as online ebooks to begin with. The first one is free. You can download it for nothing. So that allowed me to publicize it. So it was a marketing tool, but they're intended to be read as big door stoppers.
Which is great, because you've got this much to read and you can sit down and just disappear into an adventure.
That was my feeling with it, yeah.
Do you look forward to when your own children are old enough to read some of your books?
Well, we actually read Cirque du Freak to my son. My wife decided to read it last year. Yeah, he did enjoy it, but he didn't want to go any further than the first ones for the time being. It's up to them. I won't force the books on them. They know they know well, he knows I'm a writer now. He's old enough to have got. He said to me the other day, "Dad, did you used to be famous?" I said, "It's kind of, son, kind of."
So if you want to keep up with Darren's wonderful blog, you will find it on his website, and you will find him on Twitter, Darren Shan, and you will find him on Facebook as Darren Shan Verified. Also, if you check our program, you'll see links to everywhere you can find him and find his works. So again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. It's been lovely. It's been a long time since my last live event, so hopefully it won't be so long until the next one.
So again, thank you, Mr. Darren Shan, and thank you everyone for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye.